2, 1.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar looking at the support for people living with dementia from diverse backgrounds. My name's Garrie O'Toole. I'm the National Consultancy Lead at the Centre for Dementia Learning at Dementia Australia. And I'd like to begin just by acknowledging the country. So I'd like to acknowledge the various traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today. I'm in Wurundjeri country today. I'd also like to pay my respect to elders past and present and to our shared futures. Today we've got three wonderful guests. I'm really looking forward to our topic, and we'll be having the opportunity to explore how we can best provide culturally sensitive care, not just for people from various ethnic backgrounds, but also for those coming from an LGBTIQ plus community who are living with dementia. Australia has, and we're lucky to have, a really vibrant multicultural community, and that diversity extends to our ageing population. And while dementia, as we know, affects everybody, the specific challenges that arise when we're supporting individuals from diverse backgrounds have not traditionally been really front and centre. So today our guests are Rob McKenna. Rob's the village manager at Scalanbrini Care in New South Wales. We also have Amanda, who's one of the Dementia Australia's wonderful advocates, and also Dr Louisa Smith from Deakin University. I'd like to start with Amanda. Amanda, you've had quite a long journey supporting your mum who was diagnosed some time ago with Lewy body dementia. That's a challenging task for any family carer. I wonder if you could tell us just a little bit about the challenges and the successes that you're experiencing securing culturally appropriate support for your mum who comes from an African background.
Sure, thanks, Garrie. Look, there certainly have been some challenges when it came to securing support for my mum. And I suppose if I was to prioritize the top 5 for us, I'd have to say the cultural stigma surrounding mental health and dementia is a really big one. I mean, there's still that fear and lack of education that surrounds dementia, and in turn that creates that social stigma and discrimination, even social isolation. I mean, we're raised to be these strong Black men and women, who honor their families. We maintain honor. We're meant to maintain reputation within the community. And this is really paramount, especially if you think of, say, an Asian family or Italians, Greeks, African, Indians. We're all literally the same when it comes to, family unit. And a dementia diagnosis, that can certainly be seen as a source of shame. And that was the case for Mum and I, So now it's just Mum and I. No one else visits her. No friends come around. So most of us in these communities tend to hide. Right? We hide any form of mental illness. And therefore, we don't want to bring shame or burden. And so what I had to do was go out of my own cultural community and hope that humanity would catch us. There's also limited access to community resources. If I had known all those many moons ago that there were organizations like Dementia Australia, I strongly believe I would be a completely different person today. Completely. There's very few organizations or even support group specifically tailored to the needs of ethnic individuals with dementia and their families. The lack of cultural understanding. Now, when it did come to looking for a healthcare facility for mum, this was a really big one for us. There was that not many healthcare providers and support services fully understood some of the cultural nuances and also the needs of someone of an African background. For example, things as simple as looking after our skin and hair. There comes a point where, mum can't wash her own hair, and her carer didn't understand that, yes, we moisturize every day, but people of African descent, we also moisturize our hair. We have to. But they wouldn't know that, would they? I mean, nobody would know that unless somebody like me came along to say, hey, listen, the curls, to get the curls looking the way they do, you've got to moisturize them. The general shampoo you get from Woolworths, that doesn't really work. You know, you've got to get that extra moisturizer.
Yeah.
And, you know, the other thing was that respect for elders is deeply ingrained within many ethnic cultures. You know, adults hold those senior position of authority and wisdoms within their communities. So I looked for a healthcare facility that demonstrated humility, patience, and a facility that also had diverse professionals that worked there as well. And look, I'd have to say the lack of representation is also a big one. Mum being the only female of color in her facility, or person of color within the facility, is very isolating. You know, we all want to be to have a sense of belonging. The world is already a lonely place as it is right now, let alone, you know, not having that sense of, you know, I belong here and here's somebody that understands me. You know, isolation is not naturally in our nature, regardless of our backgrounds. And I'll finish off with the financial constraints. I mean, I don't know many people that have a lazy $500,000 sitting around waiting to secure, you know, a healthcare facility. I mean, we generally don't plan for that. We plan for survival. You know, we are migrants, and what we're trying to do is survive in this new place that we're calling home. And also culturally, children are seen to, you know, perceived to take care of their parents. So planning for that senior part of our lives isn't something that, you know, our parents did. It's more a survival and a sense of security that they planned for. Yes, there are government funded programs, but firstly, you need to find out about those programs and then navigate your way through all of the different forms that exist, work out which services best suit your situation, all the whilst dementia is still doing what it does best and taking your loved one away piece by piece. There's a lot to juggle, a whole lot.
That's an amazing insight, Amanda. And one of the things that really struck me while you were talking was I often think about the perspective of service providers and how we can improve our service to people from diverse backgrounds. One of the things, the first thing that you mentioned was the challenges from within your own community because of the myths and misunderstandings and perhaps lack of education around dementia, and how isolating that can make you as you know, the main support person for your mum.
Absolutely. And conversations like this helps us, you know, engage with those communities. It is about, you know, speaking up and letting them know that, listen, this does happen, and it happens a lot more common than we actually think. And there is help out there. It is not a stigma. There's a lot of help that's out there.
Amanda, I wonder if you could just say what, and we've had a chat before. I know that you're really very happy with the care and support provided for your mum at the moment.
Yes.
What is working well?
What's working well is creating, as mentioned, creating that sense of belonging for mum. So the facility that mum is in at the moment, they have cultural awareness programs. So, for example, there'll be music from different parts of the world playing. So not just from Zambia, where we're from, but literally all over the world. And it's almost, you know, a way of keeping the residents mentally active as well. So there's different activities. So we had Eid. So there was certain things that they did surrounding Eid. There was one that was really fascinating last year, which was the Diwali, which is an Indian festival where there were all these bright colors. So, you know, they got to do finger painting and immerse themselves in there, even down to the food as well. So the different types of food. So they will introduce different textures, food from different parts of the world. And they actually YouTubed how to cook a particular traditional maize meal for mum, which I thought, firstly, that, you know, that humbled me completely, because not even I can cook it. And, you know, I could just see the smile that it brought to my mum's face, because people with dementia do tend to regress. They go to, you know, different parts of their, you know, their life, and mum had regressed back into her early childhood. So being able to eat with her hands and eat something that was familiar to her, it just brought a smile to her face, and that was just brilliant to see. And to see the other residents also learning something new. You know, there are people that had never even realized that there was this maize meal that, you know, people of African descent ate, and they loved it because, again, it got them using their hands. It was great.
It's fascinating, isn't it? As you mentioned, your mum, the joy that she got from being able to eat with her hands. And again, I reflect back on my days in working within the residential aged care sector. If a resident with dementia started eating with their hands, we try and not force is not the right word. We try and encourage them to use a fork or a spoon, because that's the appropriate way to eat your dinner. It's those subtle and small things.
Exactly. And if you think about it, it also gives them a sense of ownership as well. You know, you get that pride back because they're able to still do something for themselves. Yeah. Some might not be able to hold a fork. Like Mum's got Parkinson's as well. So, you know, holding a utensil is hard enough as it is. So she still, you know, is able to feed, well, was able to feed herself then.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. We'll be coming back to some of the points that you've raised a little later in the webinar. I'd like just to bring Rob into the discussion now. Rob, you're a service provider. You have quite a diverse service population. Having listened to Amanda and her story, I just wonder if you could share your experience as an aged care provider about some of the key aspects of meeting the needs of people like Amanda and her mum.
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you for having me, and lots of notes listening to Amanda. I think some of the things we do and so much focus is on the resident coming into the facility.
Yeah.
I'll talk about how we can use families better, but I mean, I've only been in aged care for a little under 2 years. I come from a hotel management background, so 23 years in front-facing customer service roles. So I've had the opportunity to try and adapt my skills to the regulated framework, the heavily regulated framework that we operate our facilities in, and how can I use that skill set to better serve our customers, our residents. So for me, there's 3 key things. The first being that the facility and the family, we have to have a partners in care mindset. Amanda or family members like her have such a wealth of information that we'd be stupid to ignore.
Yeah.
And so whilst we may be the experts in clinical care, it's really important to accept that we don't know it all. I mean, we know that a one-size-fits-all approach is not an option. It's not acceptable. And so for me, the second point is, and you touched on it in your introduction, Garrie, I mean, we live in such a diverse community. Embrace diversity. My leadership team are all migrants. I was born in Ireland. My mother is my mother's half Ghanaian, West African. And so Scalanbrini as an organisation is Italian. The Scalabrians were an order of priests who would migrate where Italians moved to so they could keep that cultural connection, particularly to their faith. But nowadays at my facility, only about 55% of my residents are Italian. I have residents who are Irish, Greek, German, and match that with the fact that the vast majority of my team are Nepalese. We're a really diverse mixing pot at my facility. Today's Nepalese New Year's Eve, so we've got big festivities this afternoon to celebrate our team and keep them connected to their culture, because a lot of them are like my residents, they're first generation migrants, they've left their families. How can we help them fit in and feel at home here? So the residents will enjoy that as well. And similar to what Amanda said, I mean, culture is so important as dementia progresses, as access to recent memories fade, those older memories of residents in youthful times and other homes will often become their reality. So I think we have to ask ourselves as leaders of facilities or leaders in the industry and challenge our teams, how do we make the residents' culture a tangible part of their daily life? I mean, it's very easy to say that we do it, but making it real is what's important. And I think in terms of that, we overcomplicate it. We can actually do things quite easily and quite quickly. I mean, there are some simple tweaks. It's, can we add elements of the culture to our food offering? Are there ethnic specific care requirements that give the resident a better quality of life? Little things touching on the senses, music and the sensory environment. I mean, it could even be as simple as smells in oil diffusers around the facility. It doesn't have to be big things, but then as well, we can do the big celebration of cultural specific activities that make the resident feel at home, but then stimulate the senses of our other residents. And you know, we can create bicultural support tools that help the clinical team and use the families to help us create those. Again, these are cheap. They cost, you know, there may be time. They require an investment of time at the start. So do we do language specific charts for pain scales and so on? And whilst it's a bit of work to do at the start, I think it has a great payoff in the long term. It makes it easier for our team to care for the residents. And most importantly, I think to give family members like Amanda the peace of mind that they've made the right decision to put their loved ones into our care.
That's really, really interesting, that idea of peace of mind, and it's something that you mentioned, and we've heard from Amanda as well, is that obviously one of our primary focuses are going to be on the person living with dementia, but providing support and comfort and confidence for family carers, that sort of whole process that, you know, sometimes is referred to as the relinquishing care, is such a big issue, I think, and something perhaps particularly within the aged care sector we do on top of everything else that we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, listening to one of the points Amanda raised about guilt and shame, I mean, certainly with the Italian community, there is a great sense of guilt for the children putting mum or dad into care. I think sometimes in the community, you're not seen as a great son or daughter, if that's the case. And yeah, so my team and I, when we meet, we look out onto the front entrance of our facility and we always talk about, do we see families walking out with a smile on their face? Do we see their shoulders relaxed when they walk out? That for us is a win. That tells us that we're doing the right thing to relieve that carer stress, or you know, we're talking about maybe freeing up someone to have time with their grandchildren now that they weren't having, to experience some of their life, knowing that maybe the last few years have been not taken up, but heavily absorbed caring for their loved one with dementia. That's value that there's no metric that scores us on that, but I think they're really important things to think about and to recognise we're good at and share with our teams, things like that.
You've mentioned both the support required or provided for family members and obviously for the person living with dementia. And something you just sort of briefly touched on was the support you're providing for your staff. Again, we have culturally diverse staff providing care for a culturally diverse client base. What are a couple of the things that you're able to do to support your staff within that environment?
So there was a really big aha moment for me on International Women's Day, and the theme with International Women's Day this year. So a large number of my team are female, first generation migrants. I'm really proud to get to work with them. They inspire me because they've moved to the other side of the world. And there's significant cultural differences between living in Nepal and living in Australia. So we look at things like we have a really high referral rate, so we know that our team are happy working here because they bring their family and friends to come and work with us. But so at the moment, because we're very much a mission-led organisation, cost of living is biting hard, and we know that student hours, for example, have gone from unlimited hours down to the 24 hours a fortnight. We're doing cultural cooking nights once a month. So we'll say there's someone in our team, give us a recipe or two, let us know what ingredients you want, come down, the kitchen's all yours for a couple of hours in the afternoon and take home a bunch of packed meals. So one just makes life a little bit easier to live. But the residents will be interested in that. Our kitchen's deep underground, so the smells don't necessarily travel up, but word gets around quick. So I think, yeah, just that moment for me on International Women's Day, just to stop and look at my team and hear some of their stories. They're brave women, and then have that conversation with our families as well. We're an expensive facility for sure. Our aged care, as Amanda touched on, is very expensive. So sometimes there is there's the economic conversation. What am I getting for what I pay? But I often remind our families when they're challenging our staff or being a little unfair. You know, my team member, that was your mum 70 years ago as a first generation migrant. It's a big adaptation for them as well. So it's okay to be disappointed, but we'll learn from it, but have that mindset as well that some people they don't like hearing that, but I think they maybe walk away and think and see that that's right. So culture is really important in our organisation. Sorry, understanding and respecting people's culture.
And that approach of we're all learning. We're not going to get it right all the time, but and we learn from each other. And I think that idea you talked about, partners in care, is so critical. It is central to everything we talk about in dementia support. You know, person-centered care is not impossible, but it's really challenged if we're trying to know the person and support the person. If we don't have access to family who know the person best, usually, it presents real challenges, and you sort of place on top of that mix the culturally and diverse backgrounds. We do have so much to learn from each other all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look, thanks for that, Rob. Next question is for Louisa. Louisa is a senior lecturer in disability and inclusion at Deakin University. And Louisa, I know that you've been doing some research and had some projects looking particularly at the needs of people from the LGBTIQ+ community. People from the LGBTI community have been with us forever. However, probably in the last 10 years, it's an area of support that we've really started to have our eyes opened to. It, and again, can be a real challenge for service providers sometimes. We're dealing with a whole range of cultural and religious and personal beliefs. I wonder if you could tell us just a little bit about your research and the projects you've been involved in, and some of the findings, I suppose, you've had in how we can best support people from those communities.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and amazing listening to Amanda and Rob. And there are actually some synergies between, you know, and when we're talking about diversity with the LGBTI+ community of older people, but there are also some really significant differences. And I think when we're talking about, you know, partners in care or families in partnership, that particular model has to be revisited and revised when we're talking about LGBTI+ older people. And so I'll get to that in a moment, but I think that's an interesting point of departure from what the other two speakers were talking about. So I guess to go back a little bit further before we talk about dementia, it's really important to understand older LGBTI+ people more generally, and the kinds of lives that older LGBTI+ people have experienced. It was illegal to be an LGBT person until very recently. So it was only in 1997 in Tasmania that it was made legal to actually be gay and lesbian. And so it's such a new thing that for older LGBTI+ people, hospitals, healthcare systems, care environments have actually been a part of promoting the discrimination. They've tried to convert people, put them into mental health institutions, actually been directly involved in the kinds of violence that really perpetuated the discrimination that people have experienced over time. It's super important to understand that context if we're thinking about that group of older people coming into aged care living with dementia, because obviously people have avoided healthcare settings, because why would you want to go near a healthcare setting that stigmatized and discriminated you and abused you? And the idea of dementia in the LGBTIQA plus community generally is terrifying, because the very idea that you can't any longer control disclosure. And what I mean by disclosure is you can't go into a situation and say, decide whether you're going to out yourself or not, which is what, as a lesbian, I still do that, and I'm not that old, but I still go into health environments and decide, do I feel safe enough here to say I'm a lesbian? And I often don't, to be honest. And there are certain things that allow me to say that I do or don't. So that still happens for me, but I haven't been treated particularly badly in the health and care system. But for people that are over 50 even, they definitely have had a negative encounter, and particularly for trans and gender diverse people, they will definitely have had a negative encounter and experienced discrimination in the healthcare system. So there's the idea of dementia is terrifying for younger people, and when people do acquire dementia, they'll resist diagnosis and resist formal services for a lot longer, because they'll be trying to avoid getting in those formal care arrangements where they're potentially exposed to discrimination. So to come to the real question that Garrie asked, I think there are so many things that we need to be thinking about differently in aged care and health environments generally, if we're going to support LGBTI plus people. Firstly, I don't use the Q, because for older people, the idea of queer is often quite a slur. Still, so I avoid that. And to be honest, there's actually no research on intersex, which is the I. We have not any evidence of intersex people. So intersex is a natural variation that occurs in people's bodies where there isn't necessarily a distinct male and female characteristic. So it's a really important thing to understand, but we actually don't have any evidence on that. So really, when I'm talking about this group, I'm talking about LGBT plus people. And even under that acronym, those experiences are entirely different. And I'd say that for trans and non-binary people, experience in the aged care sector and healthcare sector is so much more challenging than for LGBT plus people. But if I make some generalizations, the first one is don't make assumptions, don't make generalizations. To make assumptions about anything is really problematic. The first thing that we can't make assumptions about is bodies, and the assumptions that of the ways that people are expressing their gender doesn't tell us about their body and the different parts of their body. And the way that the different parts of somebody's body that appear do not tell us about their gender. They're different things. And we need to be really clear that that's the case. The second thing that we can't make assumptions about is relationships. And this happens all the time. This has happened to me so many times when I've been in aged care environments, where it's assumed that because I have children, I have a husband. And there is something really, heteronormative about most aged care environments. And so I think it's really important for anyone working in any sector, but particularly in health and social care, to never assume with pronouns or names what somebody's partner is in terms of their gender. And so if you're talking to a woman, the assumption that the partner is a husband and where you talk about him is not a great way to go. You're much better off to refer to people's partners, family, close people, and never give them a female or a male pronoun. Instead, be talking about they and them until the person outs themselves. Now, Dementia Australia recently did change this in their counselling service and saw an absolutely amazing change in disclosure. Suddenly, people who previously didn't disclose were disclosing that they had actually were ringing about their wife and they were a lesbian.
Yep.
So I think it's really powerful, and that people will often hide their gender and sexuality if they're not getting the signals from the environment that this is something that is a safe place. And
it's our responsibility to open up that space,
absolutely.
safe space. Yeah.
We need to be signalling in that way. So that's a clear signal. To be honest, as a lesbian myself, I see gender neutral language as a signal that I'm safe.
Yeah.
I guess the other really important thing is really being trauma informed and healing informed. And I would say that probably goes for any care. But we can assume that given the history, people coming into aged care from LGBTIQ plus communities will have experiences of trauma in relation to healthcare. It's just a given. And so we need to be really informed about what that means. This goes from everything from the way that we touch bodies and in personal care, and the way that we engage in activities like reminiscence. Everyone talks about how awesome reminiscence is. It can be wonderful and deeply important for LGBTI plus people if done in a trauma-informed way. If you're asking people to talk about their past, you may well encounter trauma, and it may be very difficult. So doing it in ways that is trauma-informed is deeply important. And given the fear that people have around privacy and disclosure, that's a key reason people don't want to go into residential aged care and healthcare settings. There is a real tension, I think, there around person-centred care and disclosure and privacy. I think that the temptation that aged care providers would have is to say it's super important that everyone knows this guy's gay, because that will help you understand who they are.
Yep.
Well, in reality, it probably doesn't. It gives us a whole lot of stereotypes about what that means. But also, in terms of confidentiality, that there may only be one or two people that person feels safe to be out with, and they may never feel safe to be out with anyone in the aged care facility. They may only feel safe to be out with the community visitor from the LGBT plus organisation who is gay, who closes the door and has a conversation with them about their Grindr profile. Grindr is a dating app with queer gay men. So I think it's super important that we have strategies around that within aged care facilities to make sure that people's gender and sexuality is a private, if they decide to, that it's a private thing for them to choose about when they come out, and that it's understood that information won't be willy-nilly passed around.
Louise, there's so much.
There's so much more I could say, but I'll leave it there.
Look, and we'll come back to it. But I was just thinking, so much in what so much to unpack in what Amanda has said and what Rob has said, and also we could talk for hours about some of the things that you've mentioned. And look, one of the things that really jumped out at me while you were talking was that comment, "Don't make assumptions." And it's obviously true for people from the LGBTI community, but it's true for everybody. I'm maybe Italian or Maltese or gay or whatever it happens to be, and then suddenly we have a whole avalanche of assumptions and stereotypes that, what sort of Italian am I? Where am I from? Maybe I don't like pasta. There's just so much, and that feeds for me directly into those principles of person-centred care for people living with dementia. It's about that person, and knowing as much as we can about who they are as a person, and how, with the support that we provide them, we can help them or support them to stay connected to who they are, what's important for them. And it doesn't really matter what the label is. Those basic principles are always going to be true. Look, thank you, Louisa. Just wondering if, yeah, blah, 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 it's Friday afternoon. I'm just wondering, Jess, if we have any questions from the audience that you might like to give for our panelists today.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the questions we had is, we have a lot of clients with dementia who come from non-diverse communities. Do you have any advice on how to work with these clients when the workers are from a diverse community?
Okay, I might throw to Amanda first. I'll go around the room, but I'll put you on the spot, Amanda. We do have very diverse workforces. And sometimes they can present challenges from a quite different perspective.
Well, firstly, we are all diverse.
Mm-hmm.
There is no non-diverse.
Yes.
But I guess what you're saying is that the workforce are of a particular non-Australian cultural background, if that even exists as non-Australian culture. The best way to work is just to remember that at the end of the day, we are all human.
Yeah.
It is literally down to that. We've got emotions and we've got thoughts. And as the saying goes, we are one, but we are many. Mm-hmm. Don't paint us all with the same brush, right? Don't expect us all to adhere. And what I love about what Louisa said is, let's not make assumptions that because you and I look different or think different, that we might want something different. It's just as simple as just asking the question. I always say that if I reflect on my own professional career where, 99.8% of the time I'm the only female of color in a room, mm-hmm. I always say, don't be afraid to just ask me.
Yeah.
Just talk to me, communicate with me, and ask me the question, and I will remove whatever misconception you have, whatever curiosity you may have. And you know what? It'll actually bring us closer because you then start to understand who I am. And I also understand that your question is a genuine question because you're there trying to help me too. So just ask. But let's not separate ourselves by saying diverse and non-diverse.
Yeah.
Let's start there.
I love those comments, Amanda. We are all human. We are all different, and we are all diverse. Some of us are more diverse than others, of course. Thank you for that, Rob. Any comments that you'd like to make to that question?
Yeah, I mean, I had a look when the question was written, and it sort of touches on unconscious bias and racism and things like that. This is what I was referencing when I have conversations sometimes with families, just to help them in a moment understand that it's challenging for our team members as well. We all know about the war for talent in our industry, and I am really firm in protecting my team members, certainly from abuse and racism, which we've had to deal with. And of course, the irony is we've got people from one culture, everyone, as Amanda said, that we're such a diverse group of people, and we shouldn't be using these labels. So certainly as a leader of over 200 people, I'm very focused on ensuring my team have a safe place to work in. And I understand that there's a huge amount of emotion in our job. So we would use things like our after hours meetings and communication we send out to relatives sometimes to just remind them about behaviour, because some of the behaviour that we've maybe not necessarily seen but heard about in the industry is not acceptable. And I think it's okay, particularly to protect our team, to have that conversation. There's a time and a place for sure. And it comes back to just the most simple: communication is key. I mean, great example, Amanda, ask me. And I think people would love to be asked and have assumptions not made, as Louisa touched on before. So find some ways to keep that communication open, and as unemotional as possible. The emotional really clouds decision making. But it's a real problem. I'm interested to hear Louisa's thoughts as well on how we manage this.
Over to you, Louisa.
I'm glad you said that it's a problem, Rob, because I think it's actually a wicked, like in academic terms, we'd call it a wicked problem in the aged care sector at the moment. I feel like it's because we have a whole lot of people feeling vulnerable, ultimately. I think that we often understate the vulnerability of care workers in their roles, you know, that often people are not employed in an ongoing basis. You know, they're not getting paid a huge amount of money, and they're doing incredibly important work, and that is also very taxing. I've just written a paper about, you know, it being about being a compassionate contortionist. You need to be super compassionate and also be able to contort your body to be able to do all this amazing stuff under a really tight time frame. But then we also have, you know, people living with dementia who can't sometimes articulate what they need and want. And in the case of LGBTI plus people, and I said that I'd come back to it, this idea of families as partners and as advocates, and as we actually often don't have that for older LGBTI plus people living with dementia. For some people, they're lucky enough to have family of choice, so that may be an intimate partner or a group of friends who they've, you know, had as a family. The family of origin often has disappeared, and there may not be children. Sometimes yes, but often no. So that very different composition means that people often don't have the advocates that they might otherwise have. And so it's a very real concern for LGBT plus people living in aged care facilities who don't have advocates if workers have very different religious positions or experiences from other, you know, cultural experiences that suggest that those gender and sexuality identities aren't okay, and that they need to be changed. And we have, unfortunately, have heard stories about people, you know, not being supported to live the gender that they are, and not have their gender affirmed based on the beliefs of the aged care where they are living, and the workers where they're living. We've also heard the other, that workers do their very best when families of origin don't support someone. So it's a very complex mix, but I think what's really important to keep in mind is that when we have a lot of people who are feeling vulnerable in a situation, it is very challenging to you know, to hold up what's right and wrong. And we've been talking a lot about the importance of those professional standards and you know, and acting professionally, and using kind of professionalism, as Rob was talking about there, as a way forward, rather than relying on, you know, beliefs or values, which I think a lot of this industry does rely on, like a strong value for care. But actually, I think we also need to fall back on, you know, it's your professional duty to care for this person in the way that they want to be cared for, not in the way that you see that they should be.
It's fascinating, isn't it? I sometimes hear, as I'm wandering around, people will say, oh, well, it's not a problem. We treat everybody the same. And we've got this fine balance between treating everybody the same, which means effectively we're not treating anybody effectively or supporting anybody effectively. And on the other side, there's that almost getting tied in knots because of the concern about the diversity that we experience every day in our work and personal lives. It's perhaps a topic for another day, but balancing between those two perspectives, I think, is the sweet spot in providing support for anybody, really. Look, thank you for your comments on that question. I'd like to throw it back to Amanda. If you could give one tip to a staff member, somebody working in the aged care, whether it's community care, residential aged care, if there was one tip for them about how they could best support somebody from a culturally, linguistically, or a difference in sexuality or gender, what would your tip be?
Firstly, I'd like to say thank you to them. It is not an easy job.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for helping me look after my loved one. Thank you for helping others look after their loved ones. It is not an easy job, and no amount of gratitude would explain or express how somebody in my position who has a loved one with the condition. So I'd love to start by saying that. The biggest tip I would give, and look, it is around communication, but it would be that partner in care that Rob is talking about. You're not alone, right? These people have family. And if they don't have family, there is a community out there. We do need to get the communities involved, because that also helps educate people on this, right? I love the idea of partner in care. Personally, it's helped me with my grieving process. It's helped me understand, that the feelings that I feel, that mum's going through, you give me an opportunity to walk away and have a little breather. So please make sure you're constantly keeping somebody like me who's a carer informed. Let's have the conversation. The health facility that mum has, and I believe most healthcare facilities do this, where they send out monthly newsletters, but there's also almost like a parents teacher session where we can, you have meetings where we sit down and we have a discussion. Sometimes the doctor's involved, sometimes it's just with the healthcare professionals, right? And also don't feel the need to call. I appreciate the little phone calls, the little pictures that mum, she went out for a walk today. Oh, yay, she had a shower, and, there was no complaints there. Because I know how hard it is.
Yeah.
I know how hard it absolutely is. And here you are, somebody who's not even related to you, and you're giving them your all. So my one tip is, please involve the family, the community outside of the home, because we too play a part in this. One day it could be one of us in that situation. And the only way that healthcare facilities can also get support from the communities is if we know what's happening.
Yeah.
So let's have those, let's communicate. I mean, dementia doesn't discriminate. It doesn't treat us all the same.
Nope.
So the only way that you're going to know is if about this person is if you talk to us. And believe me when I say you are helping somebody like me who has to go to work, because I've got 3 children, I've got to look after myself, right? You're helping me so much by simply saying, hey, Amanda, mum didn't eat today. She said she liked rice, and rice was her favorite food about 30 seconds ago. We've put the rice down and she doesn't know what the heck this is in front of her.
Yeah.
What else can we do? We're in a partnership together. We are. And I loved that, Rob. I was so thrilled to hear you say that, because it's been such saving grace for myself. Most of my family are all overseas. I've got 2 older sisters. They both are in the UK and can't be here. So I'm the one that goes to visit mum all the time. And you become a family with the healthcare facility. You do. You do. So please involve us. That's my big tip. Involve us. Lean on us too. And look, yes, there will be moments where families won't reciprocate, but surely there would, like Louisa said, some families, it might not be blood relation. They might be a friend. They might be, they might be others that could assist and provide that extra support as well. If not, Dementia Australia, call them up. An advocate could turn up.
Yep.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Amanda. Look, sometimes it's simple, isn't it?
It has to be. We can't
Sometimes it's very simple.
overcomplicate it. Exactly. We cannot overcomplicate it.
Just before I ask the same question of Rob from the service provider's perspective, just to let everybody know, we've just posted in chat a link to some of the culturally diverse resources available at Dementia Australia. So we have a number of resources out there, many of them in a range of community languages, so that if you're interested, please just click on the link in the chat. So Rob, you have talked about that partnership in care. From a service provider's point of view, what would the one tip you would give to other service providers who are perhaps thinking about improving or the support they provide?
Yeah, thanks, Garrie. My tip is get the ball rolling now.
Yep.
I mean, there is work to be done, and whether that comes from, I mean, there's I think a real sense of urgency, and Louisa mentioning trauma-informed care. I mean, this is very much in the new aged care standards.
Yep. And
are they coming on 1st of July or not? Be ready rather than having to scramble at the last minute, I think, in terms of getting ready for that. I mean, there's plenty of research papers showing that families and residents have been let down by current efforts in this space. And, you know, your question is about getting it right. It's actually okay to get it wrong.
Yep.
As long as you're really committed in the long term to getting it right, because that's part of the learning process.
Yeah.
And I think advocates and families would rather see us try and get it wrong than not to try at all. And forums like this are brilliant because we can share wins, we can fast track the process. And just in terms of preparing for this, I was looking, so it was 2021, the last census, and on CLD, again, the data tells us we need to be moving fast here because, interestingly enough, those born in Italy had the highest rate of dementia.
Wow.
The rate of dementia increases as proficiency in English decreases.
Yeah.
And one thing that a statistic that really I'd love to understand more, the longer that migrants have been in Australia, the higher the rate of dementia. I'd love to know what drives that, but it's coming at us from every angle. I mean, we know the numbers of people coming into aged care in the future are huge, and we need to get prepared as an industry for the influx that's coming our way. The change in the upcoming change in the standards absolutely is all about this. And looking through some of the questions that people are having in the discussion there, I think people are starting to know that we need as an industry to be heading in this direction.
Yeah.
So yeah, to get to work, don't be afraid. And if you work in an organisation where the organisation is not comfortable with change, because we know a lot of organisations are risk averse and change is a big deal, be brave. There are some great resources out there, whether it's Dementia Australia, there are people in your community, whether it's families, there's plenty of resources available, and just making those first few changes, momentum will come pretty quickly, I think.
Start now, get ready. I often say the baby boomers coming, God help us, and I'm one of them. I've just had a message in my chat just to apologise. The link that we sent out to the Dementia Australia resources won't work in chat. We will send it out to you when we send the link to the recording a little bit later. Louisa, just a question for you then. Mm-hmm. Some resources I think for some of us, providing support for people from the LGBTI community is a relatively recent insight. And I'm just wondering if you can talk just a little bit about some resources that are available for staff around that area.
Yeah, absolutely. I have just put some in the chat. They look a bit messy in the chat, but hopefully you can work it out. I think probably the most important thing is, and thanks for those people who posted questions, particularly, you know, some of the really common questions that were posted there about, you know, people not remembering their gender and sexuality and things like that, which I think is really, really important to address. But I have put some links there. I think it's really important that we start recognising this as an area that needs further development. Advocate to your where you work to get an LGBTI specialisation verification. I think there are specialisation verifications now in quite a lot of priority groups, including culturally and linguistically diverse specialisation verifications. And what that means is that the place where you work gets verified as being able to support people appropriately and can signal to the community, whichever community it is, that you're actually prepared. So it's not just like having a little welcome rainbow on your window. You actually do have staff who, I think it's 80% of staff need to be trained in LGBTI cultural competence, and that can be done by accessing the Silver Rainbow training, which I've linked to there, which is run throughout Australia. The kind of core, the peak body in Australia is LHA, which is LGBTIQA+ Health Alliance. And the first link on the links that I've put in there is the LHA Registry of Supports, which includes supports from around Australia. One of the things that I talked about in the comment there that someone made about you don't really need to, you know, and acknowledge someone's gender and sexuality when they have really severe dementia because they've got really severe dementia, is that actually, well, I have a different perspective on that to start with, but we've also found through working with Dementia Support Australia that actually the behaviours and symptoms of dementia can be exacerbated when somebody's gender and sexuality isn't being affirmed, which makes sense. If someone's personal needs, deep personal who they are isn't being acknowledged, they're going to use behaviour as a form of communication to ensure that they are acknowledged. And so nationally, we have a community visitors program, which is available to all socially isolated people, older people over 65. Well, not quite, but anyway, it's a community visitors program, and there are specific programs for LGBT+ people. And so where LGBT+ visitors can come out, and one of the things that I think would be fabulous for work, you know, anyone in the aged care sector to know is that this is a great hookup to do, to be able to advocate for the person who you're providing support for, to get a volunteer visitor to come in who's from community, so who is also LGBTI, who can actually sit down and have those conversations and provide support that's you know, from within culture. So it's peer support model. So that's the community visitors program, and I think that's linked in the LHA support registry that I've put in the link there. Okay.
Thank you. Look, I'm just aware of the time. I can't believe the hour has gone so quickly. We could, I'm sure we could spend the rest of the afternoon chatting. There are so many fascinating stories, resources, suggestions. What I'd like to do just is to thank Amanda, Rob and Louisa for so generously sharing their time and their wisdom and their expertise on a Friday afternoon. We really enjoyed the chat. And thank you to the audience. We apologise for not being able to get to very many of your questions, but we hope that you found the information of interest and has triggered a few little things in your minds that you can think about over the weekend and bring into practice. Can I also thank Jess and Jim and Vicky, who have been pushing the buttons and pedalling away furiously in the background. Without you, none of this could happen. We'll look forward to catching up with everybody in 2 months' time. We have another webinar in May. So thank you all, and I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. Bye.
Thanks, Garrie.
Thanks, Garrie.